Hi friends! Here we are with a book for our Read Across America map. This book comes from the state of Tennessee, this long one right here. It's called Carousel Cat by Robert J. Blake. I want to tell you a story about a cat. Just an ordinary cat until the day it did an extraordinary thing. Carousel Cat. Every morning, Dan unlocked the doors of the Pavilion of Fun, and every morning the cat was waiting inside for him. Dan always wondered how the cat got into the building before he did, but the cat never offered any clues. Every morning, the cat helped Dan inspect and polish the carousel. Then they climbed into the front seat of the carriage number 3 to wait for their friends, Madame Fortune and the world's strongest tattooed man. After saying, "Good morning, and how are you?" Madame Fortune and the world's strongest tattooed man took the controls and sent Dan and the cat around for their own private ride. After a few times around, Dan took over the controls. They did the same thing, the same way, day after day. Until someone opened a new amusement park called Scaryland. It had the Super Duper Looper and the Gonna Get You Gremlin rides. It was bigger and wilder than the old Pavilion of Fun. Soon the owner, Mr. Darnett, said, "There's not enough business. I must close the Pavilion of Fun." Fewer and fewer people came to the boardwalk. Mrs. Custard closed Custard's last stand. Mr. Hazard sold off his bumper cars. Before long, Mr. Tony's Charbroil was the only place still open. And if it weren't for Dan and his friends, Mr. Tony wouldn't have any business at all. "I wish we could sit on the carousel just one more time," said Dan. "The future sits heavily upon us," said Madame Fortune in her mystic voice. "This sitting around all day is making all of us heavy," said the world's strongest tattooed man. "Even that cat is getting pudgy." Things were different, yet every day was the same. Dan and the cat always met their friends at Mr. Tony's for breakfast, and they met for lunch and dinner too. There wasn't much else to do. But one day Mr. Tony announced, "I'm sorry, I must close the Charbroil. Maybe I can open again in the spring." Madame Fortune and the world's strongest tattooed man started to spend their weekdays looking for other jobs. Now only Dan and the Carousel Cat met on the boardwalk every morning. They'd slowly walk to the end of the pier, put a quarter into the miracle binoculars, and look back at the boardwalk. "Look, Cat," Dan would say, "that's where Hazard's bumper cars used to be." But now there was nothing but boarded up buildings. They always ended their day in front of the Pavilion of Fun. "I wish we could run the carousel just one more time," Dan always said, and he shook his head, blow his nose, and they'd part ways for the night. But one morning, the cat did not come. Dan looked in the garbage cans and all his favorite places, but he found no cat. On Saturday, the world's strongest tattooed man went with him to search. He was a handy helper because he could lift cars and lifeboats so Dan could see under them, but they found no cat. On Sunday, Madame Fortune joined the hunt. She was famous for finding things, but even she found no cat. Dan was about to give up. Then one day, after a lonely lunch, Dan walked out to the end of the pier and put a coin into the miracle binoculars, and he saw something terrible. Mr. Tony's Charbroil was on fire. Soon there were firemen and policemen and a lot of smoke. Many people were pushing and shoving to get a look, and then Dan saw... Yes, he definitely saw the Carousel Cat. It ran in and out of people's legs and dashed through an opening into Mr. Tony's door. Dan hurried down the pier and found his friends, Madame Fortune and the world's strongest tattooed man. I saw the cat going in and out of the fire, Dan said. I saw him carrying rags or something, said the world's strongest tattooed man to his friend. I see the cat right now, said Madame Fortune, looking at the rooftops. The cat paced back and forth, then in circles. It disappeared for a moment and then reappeared at the corner of the building. Madame Fortune closed her eyes and pointed to the pavilion. We must go inside the pavilion of fun, she said in her mystic voice. But it's locked, said Dan, and Mr. Darnet's got the keys. This requires a feat of strength, said the world's strongest tattooed man. The world's strongest tattooed man performed his feat of strength, and the three friends went inside. Madame Fortune put her hand to her head. There's something under carriage number 3, she said. Be careful, said Dan. They walked over slowly to the carriage. He's got babies, said the world's strongest tattooed man. Kittens, said Madame Fortune in her normal voice. She has kittens. But where was the Carousel Cat? They all looked at one another, and then they looked up together. There she is, with another kitten. Way up high, the Carousel Cat stepped in through a broken window. She had one last kitten in her mouth. The Carousel Cat dropped onto a crossbeam. She hurried along the edge and then jumped onto a light that hung over the carousel. But she slipped. The Carousel Cat and her kitten fell and fell and fell. Only to be saved by the daring moves of Dan and the world's strongest tattooed man. Dan put the Carousel Cat with all her kittens in the front seat of carriage number 3. The three friends looked at each other and nodded their heads. Send her around again, Dan called. And once again, Dan and the Carousel Cat took their own private ride on the carousel. Thanks for joining me again, friends. See you soon.